Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, thanks for joining us again on Hudson County Review Live. I am your host, the women's pet and the men's regret, John R. Hines, and I am joined with former Hoboken Councilman and current Hoboken Housing Authority Commissioner David Mello. Dave, thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So Dave, we just learned probably about 2 hours ago now that Mayor Ravi Bhalla, of course you are well aware, has that new of council job, and we learned the incentives. It comes with a $60,000 salary, which is well south of $100,000 as initially stated, but there are other provisions to the contract, so let's talk about that. I mean, I know you had a chance to read the story before we sat down, so what's your take on everything that's going on here?
It's a substantial second job. I mean, I have a lot of fellow teachers who would tell you that $60,000 and the potential to make a commission of $20,000 on business brought in after the first $60,000 is very substantial. So how that can be categorized as not something that's going to split his attentions is beyond me. And it would actually be more alarming if it didn't split his attentions, because if you're being given that much compensation under a contract and you're not showing up and you're not doing much work, well then what else are you doing? What is the quid pro quo for that contract?
And just to fill everyone in, we had some website difficulties. Unfortunately, we were down for about 30 to 45 minutes. So if you haven't had a chance to read the story, just to inform anyone else that hasn't seen it, the provisions that I just mentioned was for any revenue generated for new clients, $60,000 to $750,000, Bhalla is allowed to receive 20% commission. And for any new business over $750,000, he gets a 15% commission. So I just wanted to make that clear before we move forward. So with that...
And John, if I could on that, I mean, a contract that even contemplates bringing in business to a firm of more than $750,000, how does that not set you up to compromise yourself? I mean, that's a tremendous amount of essentially being a sales rep for a law firm where you're bringing in business. That's a tremendous amount of business to contemplate having to come up with a different sort of commission structure for. So to me, it's substantial.
On that point, so you have a law degree, right? I mean, you didn't practice, if I'm not mistaken, but you're familiar with the industry, so if I'm not mistaken, again. But from your understanding, as you were growing up, and you're in law school and you graduate, what was your understanding of what of counsel does?
Well, I mean, my understanding coming out of law school was of counsel were people that didn't make partner. And then as I've grown and really my time as a city councilman, I realized that a lot of people obtain of counsel jobs that are more the equivalent of almost sales reps, that they're expected to bring in business to a firm and they're supposed to be a business generator. They get maybe a smaller salary, but they get exactly what this contract seems to stipulate, which is a percentage of business that's brought into the firm.
Gotcha.
So they're rainmakers, so to speak.
It's a good term. So with that in mind, let's rewind just a little bit here to Wednesday night. As you also are well aware, you were in attendance. The council passed a measure essentially forwarding 26 questions to the mayor, asking him about this employment. Now, to his credit, he has released his contract today, and we could read it from start to finish. Do you feel like that satisfied what the council asked for?
I think it's a good first step, but when you see a contract like this, you have to have other concerns. And there were a lot of the questions that the council asked, and I thought they were right in doing so, that go beyond anything that's revealed in the terms of this contract. Like exactly when there will be conflicts in time management, when he would have to be taken away, the security that he's needed because of, I guess, threats that have been made. I haven't heard actual specific threats, but I'm sure they do exist. Who's going to handle that security when he's doing business for this firm? This is a mayor we're talking about who, when the mayor is out of town, the mayor goes away for a weekend, they designate an interim mayor when they go away. So what do you do when they're going to work in Morristown for another firm? Do you designate an interim mayor for the afternoon? Do you designate an interim mayor for the day? There's just all sorts of questions that go beyond anything that's going to be revealed through this contract. So the contract, it's a good first step, but it's not the last step. It shouldn't be the last step.
So in an ideal world, if it was up to you, what would you like to see happen next?
I would like to see a free flow of information. I don't care how many questions the council has. I think they are within their right and within their duty as representatives of the people of Hoboken by asking them. And I would just hope that information keeps flowing.
And do you think the best way to just squash this once and for all at the next council meeting, Mayor Bhalla just attends and welcomes the questions? You think that would be the best way?
Personally, I think the best way to deal with this would be to not take the position. I'm going to be blunt with you. I just think there's no way that you can misinterpret the salary that we give to a public employee in the city of Hoboken. It's north of $116,000. That is a full-time salary, and it demands full-time attention.
Understood. So, on a different note, I mean, there's a lot that's been happening in this new year. Needless to tell you, you've been on top of it. But let's rewind actually back to November. So obviously, you ran on a ticket with Freeholder Anthony Romano. Mm-hmm. I obviously was at a number of events for all the tickets, and including yours. And I felt the energy in the room. From what I could gather, you guys felt pretty good. I think I saw you just maybe like 2 days before the election. Obviously, you didn't get the result you were hoping for. So just looking back on it today in February, I mean, what's your takeaway from everything that happened?
I mean, I'm proud that I ran. I'm glad, because the reason I really inevitably ran was I feel like there have been issues that I've pushed for, that I've uniquely pushed for. I mean, I don't hear anybody else talking about the need to reroute Patterson Plank Road to connect it directly to Jersey Avenue. I was always there for the Southwest Park, and really at the head of that effort to try to get a Southwest Park. And I'm one of the only ones who's talking about, probably the only one talking about, that we should explore different methods for expanding it. So those issues, and wanted to make sure that those issues were still addressed, a lot of the issues that are sort of unique to the western side of town where I live, they needed a voice. So I was glad I ran to continue to give those a voice, to participate in debates, to be on the campaign trail, to talk about the things that I wanted to champion, and to make sure they were still paid attention to. So I have no regrets, and it was a well-fought race, and didn't get the result I wanted, but I'm still glad I ran.
All right, understood as well. So with that said, some people have made the comment, and I know we were just talking about this, that you're hitting a lot harder now that you're on the opposite side of the dais, and you certainly had some spirited things to say.
Sure.
What's your reaction to the people who say that?
Well, I mean, when you're part of a team, you hold back to be a good teammate. And there are things that have bothered me over the years that I've held back a little bit for the sake of being a good team player. And now I'm sort of a free agent, and there's no need to hold back. So if I see something that I disagree with, I'm going to highlight it. I'm going to bring attention to it, and I'm going to continue to serve my neighbors. I don't need to have elected office to serve my neighbors, and I feel indebted to my neighbors to utilize the 8.5 years of knowledge that I accumulated to continue to be an advocate for issues that Hoboken's facing, just like I was an advocate before I ever obtained office. And now to not let that knowledge go to waste, but to use it in a productive way to get issues addressed and to get things moved forward with my former colleagues, the people that represent me, that I have a good relationship with. I can bring things to their attention. I can make some phone calls. I can get the ball rolling for something.
And then before we move on, people have said things, well, you should have run with Mike DeFusco, you should have run with Ravi Bhalla, you should have run as an independent. Do you ever think about any of that stuff beyond face value?
I mean, I have a great relationship with Mike DeFusco, and certainly, I mean, I maybe in hindsight think, did I make the right decision in that regard? But at the time, different parameters that really had nothing to do with Mike DeFusco as a person. I think he's a great candidate, a great individual. Without getting into the reasons that went through my mind back in early July, they had nothing to do with him. They were reasons that were kind of limited to this point in time on the timeline. And, I made the decision I made. I think it was the right decision to make at that time. Again, having nothing to do with him as an individual or a candidate. And when it comes to Ravi, I mean, Ravi didn't want to run with me, which was, it's just disappointing to see the kind of person he's become, because we did run together 2 times. I thought we legitimately became friends throughout the 8.5 years that we served together, the 9 years that we've known each other. But, sometimes in times like this, you know who your true friends really are. And let's face it, somebody said once that you don't go into politics to make friends. So maybe that's the situation here.
Okay, well, it can't be much clearer than that.
Yeah.
So, all right, so let's get to the Bhalla administration in 2018. So let's take it from the top. Obviously, there has been a spirited debate about runoff elections, and you are in support of at least allowing the voters to decide. So you were on the council when this first came to the public attention. So tell me about your position then versus your position now. Is it basically the same? Has it changed or what?
Well, I mean, my position then was I was always in favor of moving the elections from the spring to the fall. I always had trepidations about doing away with the runoff. I had concerns about that. The people that were pushing it, and it was really, Ravi was pushing it hardest, according to my recollections, and I have some emails and stuff that sort of say that I'm correct in my remembering it that way. Ravi was pushing it hardest, and people like, the mayor's husband were just of the opinion that December there would be too much of a drop-off and we couldn't continue to have the runoff. I mean, that did concern me at the time. I mean, I voted for things, again, to be a team player. I voted for things on the council when we originally voted for it on the council, and then we voted to pull it back and allow it to be decided by the voters. So, I stick by that. I'm glad that I did that. But now that we have hindsight and we've been through a few election cycles, I really think it needs to be reconsidered. I just do not think that anybody wanted a situation where somebody could get not even quite a third of the vote and become the mayor of this city or become a councilman at large. And I just think it has to be rethought. So I'm glad that the city council saw to it to give the people an opportunity to reconsider this. And it's going to be the people who's going to reconsider it. The council just gave them that opportunity.
Gotcha. And so if you think 50 plus 1 should be the magic number here?
Ideally, yes.
And were you surprised when Mayor Bhalla vetoed this?
I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. I look at it and I just think so many positive things can come out of it. You look at how he acted toward other candidates, particularly Councilwoman Giattino. I mean, Councilwoman Giattino is somebody, policy-wise, I definitely had plenty of times when I butted heads with her policy-wise, but she's also like a great human being and a great person who, she's a mother in the same school where I send my kids. There were times when her and I might have been butting heads over something policy-wise where we would see each other at our kids' presentation the next week and get along wonderfully. She's a good person, and to send out those mailers one after another, just demonizing her for being a Republican. I'm no Republican, but you don't demonize people for being a Republican. And then they became direct attacks on her person. I think you avoid things like that if you potentially are going to have a runoff and you're going to need that other candidate's supporters to get on board with your candidacy. I mean, if there had been a runoff in this election, it would have been DeFusco against Bhalla, and he would have needed a lot of the people that supported Giattino to support him. I think it would have kept the election at a much higher level.
So it would have been chess, not checkers. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely.
Very good. So, okay, so that's that. I mean, another issue that we've been talking about a lot in Hoboken is the Union Dry Dock. Obviously, we started the year where it looked like NJ Transit was going to buy that property from New York Waterway for just $1, but due to what appeared to be public pressure, of course, that's not what they said, but they ended up pulling it from the agenda, and the Bhalla administration was quite pleased with that, and now we're just, again, at kind of I don't want to say a standstill, but I guess just a sticking point where it's what's next. So from what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what's going on there?
Well, that's my concern. I don't feel like we're hearing anything. At least maybe members of the council are, but now that I'm not on the council as a member of the public, I'm not hearing anything about this. And that concerns me because the last interview you did of this kind was with Mayor Davis, and he mentioned specifically that their long pursuit of a ferry stop in Bayonne. And yet Ravi Bhalla has mentioned them as a possible alternative for the refueling station. How are you talking about a ferry stop and not talking about a refueling station if you are indeed eager to have that refueling station hosted in your city? So for me, to not hear anything from Mayor Davis about taking on that refueling station is a concern. Does Ravi Bhalla really have any inside knowledge to when he claims that they would be an alternative for it, that they are interested in it, but you don't hear anything from the mayor of that municipality's mouth about it? So that concerns me because I don't want this to be just where we had some nice media moments that brought attention to the issue, but nothing's been done to bring resolution to the issue.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's something we got to keep our eye on. Obviously, this has been, a better part of a decade this has been going on now? Yeah,
and that's the other thing. I mean, the Fund for a Better Waterfront, Jim Vance, Ron Hine, and others involved with that organization, they've been pushing, as long as I was on the council, to buy Union Dry Dock. And there was always hesitancy by the previous administration, which I ran with, and, I would often scratch my head as to why we don't move forward more on it. But there was always other projects that I guess seemed to take higher priority, and that's fine. I mean, we can't kill anybody in hindsight for that, but it is time to try to move forward on it, and I think it's naive to think that we can block this without helping be part of finding the ultimate solution and the ultimate other home where the refueling station will exist.
Okay. Now, let's also go back to Wednesday, and another thing that was interesting was the Rent Control Board. So,
yes.
As you know, Michael Lenz, the current chair, and Cheryl Fallick, who's been on the board, I think, since 2010, they did not get the reappointment. However, the council only approved 5 of the 7, and the 2 people that were ultimately going to replace Mr. Lenz and Ms. Fallick, they didn't get voted on. Those 2 items were pulled, and then the council introduced a measure where it's possible that they could take back the appointment power for that particular board. And, I know Cheryl was a big supporter of yours when you were on the council, and I'm sure you guys have a good relationship. So when you're looking at all of this, all these moving parts happening in a very short time, what's going through your head? How are you taking it in?
I've never liked the idea of, if you have an option between the legislative or executive branches making an appointment, I always prefer the legislative branch. You have more people, and you just have to get an agreement between a majority of the members to make the appointments. The first measure that I sponsored when I became a councilman almost 9 years ago was to move the appointment power of the zoning board members away from the mayor and to the city council. I was the sponsor of that ordinance, and I really think it should be done for every single pick that it is legally allowed to be done for. Obviously, when you run with the mayor, you're not going to push for that too hard, because you're going to just destroy your relationship with your running mate potentially. But I think they should really take as many picks as they can, because I just think it's a fair picking process when you have to get multiple individuals to agree on who the picks are going to be.
Now, some supporters of the mayor have actually said that those kind of initiatives you just spoke of and the one we just saw on Wednesday night are actually anti-democratic, because they're looking at it as you're usurping the power from the executive branch when that's where the power has lied for, X amount of years. So what's your take when you hear that kind of counter-argument?
I think democracy is a strong legislative branch. There's a reason why Article 1 of the Constitution describes the powers of the legislative branch, and Article 2 describes the powers of the executive branch. To have a democracy that really functions, you want to have a powerful legislative branch. I teach AP European history, and you see when nations in Europe became more democratic and more republics, it's when their legislative bodies became more powerful, and when the executive or monarch became less powerful. So,
interesting analogy. So, what else is going on in the Mile Square City that I haven't touched on that you wanted to throw out there today for our viewers?
Well, the 2 things that I hope my former colleagues will work on, and I certainly want to, just as a citizen advocate, do a lot of work on, are 1, Patterson Plank Road needs to be rerouted. There are grant opportunities, a Tiger grant being probably the first amongst those, which would be able to infuse the millions of dollars into a project like that. It was studied by the county and some other entities years ago, and they put a hefty price tag on it, but it's something that a Tiger grant would cover. What it would do is Patterson Plank Road, as it comes down into Hoboken in the southwest part of town, instead would be diverted, where you would turn right on the western side of the light rail tracks and then go either over or under the heavy rail tracks and connect directly to Jersey Avenue. What that would do is it would eliminate this massive bottleneck that exists now when traffic from Jersey City Heights and Union City is cutting through Hoboken. So I want to see progress made on applying for a Tiger grant and potentially rerouting that road. It's one of those things that elected officials have to do it fairly selflessly, because it's a long-term enough of a project that there's a very good chance that the people who fought for it and made it happen will be out of office when the bows are taken and the ribbons are cut.
Sure.
But it's such an important project, they need to do it. The other thing is...
If I could just interject.
Sure.
Do you have any clue about how long that would take and rough cost is, or we're not there?
I thought it would be well over a decade, but then I talked to John Jarr about it in the past, who's a traffic engineer who has done a lot of consulting with the city of Hoboken, and he said potentially you could get as quick as in 5 to 6 years, you could get shovels in the ground on a project.
It's relatively quick by government standards.
It's extremely quick. It's lightning quick by government standards.
And you had another point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, the other point is, it's really... I sponsored or was involved in a lot of the initiatives that brought the bike share system that we have in Hoboken into Hoboken, and then pretty distressed that after we made all the votes necessary to make as a city council, that Jersey City ended up going for city bikes, which we were told was not an option. And Weehawken didn't do anything, and we end up having this parochial, only in Hoboken bike share system. And I'm not saying you need to get rid of that, but I really think we need to at least bring both systems side by side and have not just 2 or 3 city bike stations, which I believe the city recently put out a survey inquiring about where people would want those if there were 2 or 3 added, but have multiple city bike stations. And if you can only have one system, give strong consideration to only having city bike, because there are, I believe, approximately 25 city bike terminals just downtown Jersey City, that part of Jersey City that's actually smaller than Hoboken and directly to the south of Hoboken. And citywide, they have over 50 stations. So yes, it's a little more expensive, city bike. I think it's about $165 a year as opposed to $100 a year for the bike share system in Hoboken. Mm-hmm. But if you have somebody who works in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Jersey City, or they go to Manhattan, Jersey City, and Brooklyn, and they want to use the same bike share system, it's like we're not part of it. It's just counterintuitive. I mean, why would we have this essentially a mass transit system, not a mass transit system, but a transit system of bike sharing that exists in all parts of this area except for Hoboken? We have a different one.
Interesting point to consider for sure. So I'm actually going to move away from Hoboken for a moment, because most people, or maybe they do, I don't know, but I don't know if everyone knows that you're actually a Jersey City teacher now and have been for a couple years. And this contract struggle is ongoing, and the main thing is Chapter 78. So from your perspective, knowing that it's been, what, like 6 months now without a contract?
This school year, essentially, there's been no contract.
And with that said, and obviously knowing about the Chapter 78 struggle firsthand, could you just tell us a little bit about that and where you see the negotiations going, if anywhere?
I hope they move forward in a positive direction. I'm a new enough teacher that I don't want to pine on it too much, but this Chapter 78, there's immense amount of contributions being made to the health insurance by the employees in Jersey City, and it's at a thing where if you get a raise because you go up in salary for a time served, it gets wiped out often by the raises and the amount of contribution you have to make to health insurance. So it's pretty disrespectful, really, how much it cuts into your take-home pay, and I just think it's not appropriate, and I hope they come to a resolution on a new contract as soon as possible. Because even if they do, it's probably only going to be for a few years, and we're going to be renegotiating one soon enough. So let's get this one ironed out, and then maybe get a head start on the next contract.
I don't know if you saw, I actually just caught it like out of the corner of my eye earlier today, but yesterday, as there's been for many weeks, there's been teachers rallying before school, after school, and I think even on free periods too. But the point I was going to make...
No, I believe it's only been before
and after. Okay, no problem. So anyway, the point I was going to make was there were actually police officers in Jersey City issuing tickets for drivers that were honking and were stopping for the teachers. Did you see that?
I heard a little bit about that today.
What's your take on that?
I think all of us public servants, whether they be public safety, police officers, fire, even ambulance, medical workers, nurses, teachers, whether it be college or secondary or elementary, we all need to stick together. So I would hope those tickets are only being written in a extreme case, and I would hope that isn't being pushed too hard, because we really need to stick together as unions and make sure that those of us who basically preclude ourselves from ever making too much money because we really love serving our community, that we all stick together and make sure that we get an adequate and fair contract.
All right, that makes sense. Now, obviously, we all know about the tragedy in Florida. I guess it was like a week and a half ago now.
Sure.
And so there's a lot of talk about security and police in schools, and the president and his administration have actually talked about the possibility of increasing pay for teachers that do decide to get firearms and train to use them properly. What's your take on this potential situation?
That is absolutely absurd. As a teacher, I don't want the I don't know if you should even term it a responsibility, but I don't want to have a firearm in school. It's enough just to try to get all of your students under the age of 18 to quietly do a lockdown drill or quietly, keep their heads in a situation that it's hard for any human being to keep their head in. To add a firearm to the situation just is lunacy to me.
So it's just too much of a liability. It's
too much of a liability. And I mean, I have nephews on my wife's side of the family and a niece who, the one niece and nephew grew up in Littleton. And, way before those shootings happened, they were little babies at that point. But and then my other nephews who are in the University of Florida right now, they grew up in Coral Springs, which is one town over from where the shootings were. And my wife has a cousin who works in the sister high school to the one where the shootings went on. So, I mean, it's devastating. And as a teacher, it's just horrific to hear about these shootings. But, we need gun control. There's no reason for an everyday citizen to have an automatic or semi-automatic weapon. My uncle was a lifelong hunter. He had a gun rack full of hunting rifles. He had a bow and arrow. He didn't have semi-automatic weapons. There's just no need for that. And then when people say, oh, you're not supposed to infringe on any arms, well, we don't let any common citizen carry a nuclear weapon around. So, there's lines that need to be drawn, and I think where the lines are drawn now is not even close to adequate, and we need to make those weapons either virtually impossible to get or truly impossible to get.
Okay, and before we call it a day here, Dave, could you just tell us a little bit what's happening at the Hoboken Housing Authority, maybe a couple resolutions or endeavors that you guys are working on that you think are positive for that community?
Well, the biggest thing right now is we're working on saving some money from an energy perspective. So I know the executive director has been looking at some different options for bringing more energy efficient, toilets, lighting, such as that, and we're trying to explore the different options and see what's most cost effective. So that's one major thing we're working through. The doors have been being installed. That the city was vital in getting us some funding for the doors to be put in, and we've been improving the security and just a lot of measures along those ways because the buildings are old and they haven't been maintained well over the years. So when you take an old building and you don't maintain it, you have a lot of problems. So we're trying to work through those problems and deal with them, and slowly but surely, I think we are.
Very good, Dave. Former Councilman, Hoboken Housing Authority Commissioner Dave Mello, it was a true pleasure. Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate your patience. Have a fantastic weekend.